You're able to hear me? So, welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hearty welcome and very, very happy to have you this afternoon. So, we have the team of faculty members joining us, and we will be commencing it in few minutes' time.
Okay.
So, easy for you to enter through the link.
Pardon?
So, was it easy for you to enter through
Yes,
the?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely smooth.
So actually, I've already have given you an introduction about the kind of project-based learning framework that is being adopted by Kumaraguru College of Technology, and but we are very new to this process, and we started off only in the last year, and looking at you as a pioneer and also at least for the Indian institutional conditions where we see that you're a pioneer. And shall we begin the program with the introduction and yeah, Abhirami?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we can start off.
Yeah. Happy afternoon, everyone. I extend a warm welcome to our respected principal, Dr. Saravanan, Associate Dean and Head School of Foundational Sciences, Dr. Reddy Rarsi, heads of various engineering branches, faculty members from KCT Business School and Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, and our fellow colleagues for the 8th session of the Scholastic Talk series on Saturday, 17th July 2021, between 3 and 4 p.m. Indian Standard Time via MS Teams. It is a privilege to welcome our resource person, Professor Sanjay Goel, Distinguished Professor and Director, Institute of Engineering and Technology, J.K. Lakshmipat University, Jaipur. Hearty welcome to you, Professor. Scholastic Talk Series is an enabling platform to challenge our understanding and to trigger some thought-provoking conversations. I now invite Dr. Ellie Larasi, Associate Dean and Head School of Foundational Sciences, to deliver the opening remarks and introduce our resource person. Over to you, ma'am.
So thank you, Dr. Abhirami. So this is an occasion where we have a person of eminence and, to share his experience with us. So that way we are thankful to Professor Sanjay Goel, Director of the Institute of Engineering and Technology, JKL University. And in fact, this university is quite young, but they managed to introduce the project-based learning framework with such leadership, and he's a progressive educational leader and engaged in developing, demonstrating new models of engineering education with a lot of passion for very many years. So I see, he's an alumnus of BITS Pilani and IIT Delhi. So he has approximately 35 years of professional experience at different organizations in various roles. And he was a programmer at National Informatics Center, and he was a faculty in the Department of Computer Engineering at Delhi University. Probably, I believe he started his experiments there. So when I read his article, I understand that he began his experiments probably in 1980s. So and also he was a project manager and director of multimedia at Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts and HOD of Computer Science at JP Institute of Information Technology. And that way I think he has got extensive experience. And what is so interesting is his interest towards not only in computer, related fields, but kind of, cultural informatics and, learning technology, the human aspects of the software engineering. So that way, a kind of multidisciplinary educational and professional background. And he enjoys truly the interdisciplinary scholarship of integrating IT with a variety of context and human activities. So that way, I think, Professor Goyal started his research in terms of changing the pedagogy and also the kind of assessment for better teaching and learning efficiency long back, probably 3 decades. So that way, I think, he's the right person to tell us about his experience, and therefore we will take the maximum benefit out of this interaction. So with this note, let me invite our Professor Goyal, Dr. Goyal sir, and to take it further. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor RC. I'm very happy to be amongst you. Is my slide visible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So, Professor RC approached me some 2 weeks ago, and her enthusiasm for it was infectious, and we immediately agreed that we will hold this lecture, and then maybe something else also in future. And it's she who decided this title. It's a title given by her. So project-based learning, emerging global perspectives. And I'm happy to speak on the title given by her. Okay. So I want to start the lecture, this session. I mean, unfortunately, I actually do not enjoy giving lectures. I'm a person who likes to interact in my classes. I mean, these days more of my classes are with the PhD students and with the faculty members, but I prefer to have more interactive classes. But given the constraint that we have, this medium, and I can't even see any face. I don't know who all are attending this lecture. So I would love to have some interaction coming in. But I would like to start with some what we call in our culture Subhashitani. Okay, 3 great gurus, 3 different areas, 3 different geographies, 3 different times. Socrates, Galileo, Einstein. And I want you to look at what all they said about teaching learning and try to see, is there a pattern there? One is something like 2,500 years ago, then around 500 years ago, and then more recent. So very different time zones, very different geography zones, very different fields. And yet, and they are the scholars of top quality, in our human civilization, beyond the boundaries of their countries and geographies and the time. They all are saying same thing. Their words are different, but meaning is same. Okay. Socrates says, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. And same idea. Galileo says, I can only help them to find it for himself. And Einstein also says the same thing. I can attempt to provide conditions in which they can learn. So this idea that we can teach somebody something is rejected by all 3. So with this as the base point for this talk, as the Subhashitani for today, I would like to move on now. This is what is happening to the world. More information through research, through various activities has been created in the last 20 years than was created in the previous 5,000 years. Okay. Now the predictions and the projections are that possibly information is doubling every 75 days. The amount of information that we have access to is doubling every 75 days. That doesn't necessarily mean that the wisdom is doubling or the creativity is doubling, but information certainly is doubling. 75 every 75 days nearly. Now, what does this mean? Can we teach information? Is it humanly possible to teach information? When the information was less, it was possible to teach information. But in the last 20 years, we have produced more information than was produced in the previous 5,000 years. So clearly we have to review the situation and go back to our objectives of education. Passing on information cannot anymore be the objective of education. And it so happens that in the thinking of the great gurus, we just saw the Subhashitani, it never was. But the structured education system somehow defined that as its goal. And if you check, and I don't have to really argue a lot in order to convince that the structured education system, whether it was school education or higher education, actually believed that giving information is the objective of education. And that can be seen just by looking at the question papers of the schools and the question papers of the boards, question papers of the universities. A large portion of those question papers was checking the information that the student has learned. So they may say anything. The boards, the universities, the colleges, the schools, they may say anything. But look at their question paper and you know what they value. What they value is information. Describe this, write a short note on this. These are the very common questions in most subjects, including in engineering and sciences. Somehow mathematics escaped that because it was easier to formulate problems and people could build problems. But otherwise, hardly any subject escaped that problem that you are writing short notes about specific topics. So information was the objective by and large. It cannot be the objective. The great sages said, the great scientists said, and now the situation is like that because information is doubling every 75 days. So here is a very recent report by McKinsey, February 21, very recent, coming from the oven directly. So they have in their report, McKinsey, as you know, is the leading consultant company. So they have identified 10 skills that would be in high demand in the post-COVID India. And here is the list as given by McKinsey. OK, I request you to go through this list. I don't want to read these lines. Just go through this list. OK. Do you find something surprising here? Does anybody find anything surprising there? Can we have some interaction here at this point? Maybe we can spend a minute or two discussing this list.
Participants could kindly raise your hand and we would call out your names and you could interact with Professor.
Entrepreneurship.
Do we have some comments on this?
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Hema, please go ahead, Hema.
Sir, good afternoon, everyone. So I think creativity is in much of demand. So that is so surprising. So that is what I wanted to share, sir.
I mean, you are saying that why creativity is so much in demand, or you are thinking that it is?
Yeah.
Why creativity is so much in demand?
So
That's
much
what
in
you are
demand.
saying?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. OK. So there is a surprise that you see that creativity seems to be projected in high demand, and that has come as a surprise to you.
Dr. Maheshwari, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Professor. I strongly agree with all the points here. And as mentioned, this post-COVID will definitely look into all these criterias because we as teachers need to be equipped with all these kind of stuffs for us, not only for us, but for to look after our own students. So in that way, there's advanced IT skills and programming techniques and entrepreneur and initiative kind of taking adaptability, data analysis and computational skills. All these are very much important in today's current scenario. So I strongly agree with all your points. Thank you, sir.
These are not my points. These are McKinsey's points. McKinsey Global,
Okay.
they have identified, and I'm just sharing. So they have done the research and they have put it in their report. You can Google this report, McKinsey's Global Institute report, and you can go through this. Okay.
Yes.
But this question that why creativity is important is a very, very important question, and I'm glad she has
There
raised.
is one more hand going.
Please.
Professor Senthil Kumar.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Senthil Kumar from Mechanical Engineering Department. And the seventh skill, teaching and training others, I don't think that it can sustain the momentum into the future, because the learning is going to change from self to an organized kind of that what we have now.
So there'll be so the role of the teachers and trainers will diminish, in your opinion?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Gradually and higher levels, not
People
in
will
the
learn
school.
on their own. People will learn on their own. Students will learn on their own.
Not completely vanish, but they start their own phase of learning, and the school, college kind of that slowly it will vanish.
So,
in my opinion.
See, school, college as a unit may undergo a structural transformation. That's okay. As organizations, these organizations may get transformed. School, college, university, they all may go under a transformation. But the role of somebody who facilitates learning of others, okay, may not be by teaching, but facilitating others' learning. So the teaching will undergo a change. Will teaching go out of fashion?
No, sir. No.
So the process of teaching will undergo a change. The
Yes,
process of imparting training to others will undergo a change. But so the teacher of tomorrow will have to be very different from teacher of yesterday.
Yes, sir.
And even
totally agree.
So we will need smarter teachers.
Yes, sir.
We will need more effective teachers. And the answer to both these 6 and 7 points that my good friend said, that why creativity, I'm surprised that why creativity is so important. You see, because the world that we live in is very volatile now. Okay, it keeps changing. Suddenly in mid of March, we experienced a different world we were not at all ready for last year. Right? None of us had imagined that we will ever live a life like we are living now. And for so many days, it's been more than a year. And we are not sure for how long would we live this life. So it is because of that creativity that the world is still going on. We found solutions to run the life using whatever technologies were available and creating new technologies. And still the schools and the colleges are running. They are not closed. So finding out quick solutions to unfamiliar problems is the demand of the day. We need quick solutions. We need feasible solutions, economically acceptable solutions, sustainable solutions, not polluting solutions. So without spending too much of money, without spending too much of resources, without spending too much of material, without creating too much of pollution, and without creating social unrest. Right? And creating smart solutions, sustainable solutions requires creative thinking. It requires innovation. Okay, so that's why creativity is very, very important. The one skill that the corporates of today are valuing very high is creativity. If you can think out of the box, that is highly, highly valued by all organizations. That's why creativity, we would love to have more discussion on this. Unfortunately, I have only 1 hour slot and I cannot possibly exceed that 1 hour by more than 5-7 minutes, I guess. Okay, but that's very important question. Why creativity is important? Because the word is, and because it is so competitive now. The average life of the product, average shelf life of the products has drastically reduced. The time to conceptualize to deliver the product in the market, that cycle has reduced in time. So for various economic reasons, for various social reasons, creativity and innovation are far more important than they were 50 years ago. And now I want you to have a look at some excerpt from the new education policy 2020. What does the new education policy say? Okay, it says it lays out the purpose of education in the first point, and it lays out the purpose of higher education in the second point. So second point is a subset of the first point. Okay, but first point, the larger purpose of the education is to train. So it says education must thus move less towards content, more towards learning how to think and solve problems, how to innovate. Okay, that is the purpose of education. So that means giving content, giving information, giving this theorem, giving that theorem, giving this law, that law, this fact, making them mug up the periodic table. That is not the purpose of education. What to do with the periodic table is important rather than mugging up the periodic table. Okay, so thinking critically and solving problems creatively, that's the main purpose of education. That's what the new education policy under great Kasturi Rangan has laid out for the country. And it says we need to provide pedagogy which is experiential, holistic, integrated, discovery oriented, learner centered, discussion based, flexible, and of course enjoyable. That's what Kasturi Rangan's new education policy says. And then there is a purpose for higher education that has been laid out in the same policy. Higher education means we should be able to construct and implement robust solution to society's problems. That's the main purpose. So we need to create people through higher education who can design solutions that are robust, acceptable, sustainable. And for doing that, we need creativity, we need innovation, we need people who can learn, because the situation is going to be volatile. We cannot imagine that tomorrow's world will be somewhat like today's world. It can be very, very different. Here is some research on learning. It shows some different researchers in their papers, different papers, what they found out is the effectiveness of learning in terms of the retention rate, retention efficiency of the material that was learned after some gap. How much could they recall? How much could they relate afterwards, after some gap? So somebody tested it after 5 days, somebody tested it after 6 months, so the method of teaching was different. The method and the retention gap was different, that after how much gap was so different papers had looked at different aspect, but there is still a trend. And what do we see in this trend? At the top, minimum retention is because of lecture reading. At the bottom, maximum retention when we experience something directly, when we do something in practice, and when we teach to somebody. We all know that. Being teachers, we all know that. Possibly some of the subjects that we teach, we actually learned when we taught it for the first time or the second time. As students, we hadn't really learned it quite well. But this task to teach to the students forced us to learn it deeply. And the questions raised by the students forced us to think in different directions. And then we learned the subject. But while we were students, we learned it possibly superficially, not so well. Okay, so there is a famous professor, Professor M. David Merrill in Utah State University, and he has a famous quote: "Information is not instruction. Giving information is not teaching, is not instruction. Teaching is something else." What Socrates had said. So if I go back to that slide of Socrates, Galileo, and Einstein, all of them had said that I cannot teach anybody. I can create conditions for learning. I can help them think. That means the teacher's actual job should be to create those conditions that facilitate learning. Is to create those conditions where the student is forced to think, not give information. Giving information is a very easy job. And in the Google era, in the internet age, with the smartphone in the pocket of every student, where is the need of learning, of remembering information? But thinking, even stronger need than before. So here are some more important advices by some 3 different very important bodies. One is National Academy of Engineers USA, one is ACM and IEEE Computing Curriculum Committee, another is this American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Request you to go through what they all are saying. So this National Academy of Engineers is advising that the essence of engineering must be taught from the early stage of curriculum. First year itself, essence of engineering, and it defines what is the essence of engineering. Essence of engineering is iterative process of designing, predicting performance, building and testing. So designing, building, testing, predicting performance, these are the essence of engineering. And National Academy of Engineers is saying you teach it right from the first year. Then ACM and IEEE Computing Curricular Committee is saying project-based classes mimicking industrial projects. It is advocating for that kind of classes where students get an experience of typical industry-like projects. And then association of this Society for Mechanical Engineers, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, it is saying that they must be involved in project-based learning experiences that has team orientation. All of them saying the same thing. And here is our own UGC before the new education policy 2018. It had advocated that time has come to progress towards achieving learning outcomes and assessing them through a variety of assessment methods, and they gave this list of 12 and it can be expanded further. Our examination system, our assessment system in our country is heavily biased towards time constraint examinations. 1 hour test, 2 hour test, 3 hour test, written exam. It is advocating for a variety, much larger variety. It is advocating for open book exam. It is advocating for assignments. It is advocating for laboratory reports. It is advocating for a variety. By and large, still, even after 3 years of this recommendation, and this is not the first time UGC recommended it, even before there have been such recommendations by various agencies. But our university system, especially this affiliated model that we have created in our country, sadly, even for technical education, because one university controlling few hundred colleges in a particular state, all the students in all the colleges following the same syllabus and writing the same exam. And you know what happens when so many colleges, lakhs of students writing the same exam in hundreds of colleges. What can happen? What would happen to the standard? The quality of the question paper will have to be low, because no state, no board, no university will be able to will like to see 80% student failing. So in order to avoid the failure of 80% students, what they do? Set up the question paper which can be attempted by most easily. Okay, so UGC has advocated that we should do this. New education policy has advocated that we should do away with the affiliation model, and the affiliated colleges should become autonomous colleges, designing their own syllabus and designing their own exam, or they should become universities, doing it even more freely. So new education policy, because of this limitation of this affiliated model, had advocated that by 2035 they have said that the affiliated model should go. There are serious problems in that. Here's another point that I want to bring in. Unfortunately, I can't see any one of you, so I don't know whether some of you are having the similar experience after lunch.
Yeah.
But if you are having, not unusual. Not unusual. It happens to me.
No.
No, but even if you are having, I am not surprised and I will not feel bad. Because after all, we are all human beings. And our evolution took place in jungle. It is only last few thousand years we are a urban or a rural society. Before that, it was all forest. So thousands of years of evolution, we were not genetically evolved for attending lecture. In the entire history of evolution, our Mother Earth is some billions of years old, and in that, several tens of thousands of years is the history of our species. Okay, starting from Africa and then moving all over the world and evolving. In that evolution, in several tens of thousands of years, how many years have we attended lectures as a species? Very small. So we are not really evolved to attend lecture, and that is why it happens, especially after lunch. So here is a study that was done by John Medina. There is a book called Brain Rules. Look at this graph. What happens to attention in a classroom? Attention falls down rapidly within 10 minutes. And then it remains there. And then just before the end of the class, attention starts reviving. Because now student is looking forward to the next similar cycle. There will be some movement. Either the teacher will move out or the student will move out. So there will be some physical activity, the bag will be closing, something will be happening. So in that expectation, attention is increasing, but it doesn't reach the original one. That is so the bulk of the lecture class goes at this lowest level of attention. So what should you do? As soon as after 10 minutes in a class, you should give a booster. Give a booster so that it again goes to the top. Engage the student in some activity. Okay, do not give a lecture. Create a dialogue. Create some kind of activity in between so that students do not fall trapped in that lower part of the curve. And their attention goes up in between, and then for majority of the time of the lecture class, let me say, not the lecture, but the class, their attention span is at a higher level. Okay. I would have loved to listen to your experiences here if I had time. I would have loved to spend some 5 minutes here listening to you as to how do you make your classes interesting? What kind of activities do you engage your students in the class? How do you revive their attention? You may not have been aware of this research, but I'm sure many of you do engage your students in various activities in your class. Maybe some problem solving, maybe you ask some questions, maybe you give them some group exercise. Okay. And if you don't, please start doing that. Your classes will become more enjoyable by the students. This is a new generation class model. Doesn't look like a class, right? Looks like a cafeteria. But it's a class. So the sitting arrangement is very different. The way our classes are designed, very bad design. The classes are not designed to encourage discussions. The classes and the only kind of discussion that it is designed for is a discussion between the student and the teacher. Among the students, it is not designed for. The architecture doesn't really facilitate that. One has to tilt the neck in order to talk to the student in the behind. So this kind of class architecture is designed keeping this in mind, that the class is going to be a place of doing activity, a place of doing discussions, brainstorming, problem solving, etc. It is not a place for transmitting information. The class that we have in our colleges and universities, they are places for transmitting. They are designed as places for transmitting information. But information transmission is no more the goal. And as my friend, I forget his name, did point out that he does not see the future of the school and the universities in future. I would say in the present form, schools, universities, colleges will continue to exist, but in a different form. Present form, I agree with you, doesn't have a great future. Okay. I'm sharing with you a 15-year-old picture of my own class. This is actually a class in JP Noida with 4th sem students when I was teaching computer graphics. Our conventional teacher and a principal or a dean would have suspended me if he had seen this. He would say, what kind of class is this? So in my class, I'm trying to engage students in discussion, in problem solving, in brainstorming, but the class was not designed to do that. So I'm just using that space in a very, very uncomfortable manner. It is not designed to do this. This is designed to do what I'm doing in this architecture way, which is designed for one way between a lot of students and one teacher, and teacher giving the gyan to the students. Now, after this, let me give you 2 categories of the teaching methods. There are broadly 2 types of teaching methods. One is called deductive. Second is called inductive. Deductive is you explain the fact, you explain a concept, explain a rule, a guiding principle, and then engage the student with examples, with activities, laboratory experiments, field experiences, give them situations to find solutions, to solve issues and do some problem solving. So concepts first and then examples and activities. That's deductive method. That's the classical method. Disconnected from the real life. You tell a Newton's law and then explain an example. So the teacher can do a good job even in this method by bringing interesting examples, by bringing interesting activities. The differentiator between a good teacher and a bad teacher here is because the concepts, etc. are already there. Teacher is not discovering new concepts. He's explaining the existing concepts, but for explaining, a creative teacher would use interesting examples, novel examples. He or she will design very interesting activities. He or she will engage the students in field experiments. Okay, and give them interesting problems. Because by doing that kind of thing, does the concept or the rule become clearer? Otherwise, how much time does it take to describe any theory or any rule or any principle? I will write Newton's law and that's it. In a slide, I can write 3 Newton's laws and I'm done. The teacher's efficiency comes when teacher gives beautiful examples. And even better, if the teacher gives beautiful, interesting activities to the students, so that those Newton's laws, Ohm's law, Coulomb's law becomes understandable, really, through activities. That is deductive method, which has worked fairly well. But for the past several years, there is a greater emphasis on inductive methods. Inductive methods are reverse of the deductive methods. Here you first engage the student in the purpose. Try to give why before engaging the student in any principle, any theoretical study. Why that theory is important. First, sensitize the student to that by giving cases, by giving examples, by engaging the student in activities, experiments, experiences, situations, trying to resolve some issues, trying to find some solutions to some problems. Immerse them in that kind of experience and then trying to make a meaning of that, trying to make a learning out of that, then guide and mediate the students to infer, to deduce concepts and rules and principles. Now, this is very different from the first one, deductive, just the reverse. While the first one is A for apple, the second one is apple for A. Very, very reverse. And there are various methods of inductive style. Okay, you have Socratic method, inquiry learning, and the theme of today's talk, PBL, has 2 expansions. One is called problem-based learning, the other is called project-based learning. And there are some commonalities in all of these. They're all student-centered. They expect the student to be much more responsible. Student has to be immersed in problem solving. And in the process of problem solving, student learns the concept. And teacher has a role there. It is not that the student learns on his own. It is very difficult. It will take, otherwise, I mean, if there is no teacher, learning Coulomb's law can become a 10-year effort. Okay, so teacher will mediate, teacher will guide, but will not give the principle directly. It will help the student to sort of rediscover, as if the student is discovering Coulomb's law for the first time. The teacher will lead the student to as if one is making a fresh discovery. Okay, by giving cues, by guiding, by mediating, by giving some examples, by challenging their theories, by challenging their assumptions. Okay. So here are 2 of those inductive teaching methods, problem-based and project-based. Minor difference. Problem-based, it can be small problems, can be problem based on single topic, or can be problems based on multiple topics, a single problem which engages the student for the whole semester, multidisciplinary problem, it is possible. But the problems have to be open-ended and ill-structured. These are not well-defined problems. You don't solve that 2x plus 3y is equal to 5 and then give another such equation and ask the student to solve it. Solving that kind of problem does not make it problem-based learning, because it is not ill-structured problem. It's a well-structured problem. So the problem has to be ill-structured, not well-defined. It has to be connected with the real world, and it has to be open-ended in the sense that different students can possibly come to different answers. We don't expect them to come to the same answer. That's problem-based learning. Project-based is they have to create a product. It can be hardware, it can be software, or it can be model. It could be a paper model also. Computer simulation or a device. That has to be created. So you could say it's a special type of problem-based learning. Project-based learning is a special type of project-based learning, where different tasks lead to creation of the project. Now, project has been there in many courses. Many teachers have been giving projects. Difference is there is a very important difference. Giving projects in the course and making the learning project-based are two different things. Giving projects is you first explain all the concepts and then ask the student to do a project. First you acquire all the skills, first you acquire all the required theoretical knowledge, and then you do the project. That is one conventional approach. This is not project-based learning. Okay. Project-based learning is the project is defined in the very beginning. Okay. So project is used as the method of instruction. The discussion of the theory comes in the context of doing the project. So project is discussed almost in every session. Every theoretical topic comes in the context of the project. That is project-based learning. Project does not come at the end, it comes in the beginning. It is not the fruit of the learning process, it is at the root of the learning process. So there are different ways a project-based learning model should be implemented. Kolb had given a cycle about experiential learning. So he suggested, and that was in 80s, he suggested start with a why, give a problem, introduce a problem, and try to relate it with the real life, try to relate it with the student's specific interests. That means the problem's definition could be customized by the student, so that student is sufficiently motivated to solve that problem because it is related to student's interest and experience. And then give the facts, the experimental observations, the principles, the theories, the methods, etc. Excuse me. Okay. And then move on to the how aspect, give some practice and then explore. So this is a very important experiential learning cycle proposed by Kolb, and in all project-based learning models, this one has to go through the cycles from why, what, how, what if. This has to be iterated through several times. This is one aspect with respect to PBL. Another, because Madam wanted me to give a global exposure to PBL. So here is a model that was created in MIT Media Lab. They called it lifelong kindergarten. So they said the best way to cultivate creativity is to support students to do projects that are based on their passion. So if somebody is interested in music, let them do engineering project related to music. If somebody is interested in history, let them do an engineering project related to possibly archaeology. Okay, so projects based, linked with passions in some way, and collaboration with peers, and in a playful manner. Playfulness is very, very important. It should not come as a burden. So if the student is allowed to pick up a project that relates to their passion, an engineering project related to cricket, for example, most of the students will find it more engaging, more playful than if they have to do it in an area for which they don't have any passion about. So like kindergarten is a very playful school experience. They are saying the lifelong learning should take place in a playful kindergarten. Okay, so give them projects in the area of their passion, allow them to work with their peers, very much like kindergarten, and have them a playful experience there. That is what the MIT Media Lab suggested for, and that is how it relates with the project-based learning. I will skip this because of the shortage of time. Here is, we have a collaboration with All in College, and Madam also has possibly approached them for some details. So they have a project-based learning model implemented. It's a small college in US, not a big university, but they have become famous for doing project-based learning. So they have developed a GAPA, what they call GAPA model, goals for every project. So in most of their courses, they follow a project-based learning approach. But they still do some conventional teaching because not everything. So for one principle that I would like to give is try not to do it for every course and for every topic. Start small. Have confidence and then move on, because doing bad PBL is far worse than doing a mediocre deductive teaching. So just because it is new, it is not necessarily better. So start small and gradually build on your experiences. So they have developed this GAPA model where students, you have the goals of the project, and then you design certain activities, and students has to deliver certain products in terms of reports and the hardware and the software, etc. And then the assessment is linked with the goals and the activities and the products. And the goals are multidimensional. Goals can be development of the skills. Goals can be development of the design skills, creativity, or developing some subject knowledge, or developing critical thinking. Okay, so project goals can be multidimensional. You define the goals and then define the activities, define your deliverables and assessment methods accordingly. That's the broadly the PBL, they call it PJ project. They differentiate PBL and PJBL. PBL is problem based, PJBL is project based. That's how they do it. This is what we have done for the last 3 years. First year, these are first year classes. Not so fancy as you see in the European or the American classrooms, but conceptually the same thing. Conceptually the same thing. It is not designed as a conventional classroom. So students are sitting across tables. They are discussing, they are solving problems, and there are whiteboards all around the room. So teachers can write there, the students can write there. Okay. So we have developed many courses that we run in PBL way. Okay, that required us to redesign the curriculum, redesign the assessment models. Okay. And let me see if this can run. Is it running? No, I could not run this video. This was a video of the journey, and I am sorry, I'm not able to run this. So anyway, I'll skip this. Look at this assessment scheme. It's a 6-credit course totally, given in 2 parts, semester 1, semester 2, 3 credit each. And please look at the evaluation scheme. It is very different from the conventional evaluation scheme. There is a lot of emphasis on assignments, projects. Okay. These are the different activities that were done by the students in this course. So you have to plan in advance what kind of activities will you engage the students in, and why those activities, and what kind of concepts do you want them to learn by doing those activities. You have to plan that. the syllabus, you have to identify what are the concepts that you want them to learn well. You may have to cut down on some conventional syllabus so that you want to do certain concepts much more deeply. So you want to have time for doing those selected concepts in a deeper manner. Okay, so many assignments planned in advance before the start of the semesters. So many submissions planned in advance. Okay, and then all this is assessed. All these activities and assignments and submissions, etc., are assessed. And I'm sorry, this tool doesn't allow me to run the video, but this is a 3D. This is an example of a project done by the first year students, and it's in 3D. I mean, it's a video that otherwise could have just shown you all the views of this wheelchair. There is another similar project, and so while implementing PBL, project-based learning, there are certain assumptions that we have to make. You have to look at project as the central vehicle of instruction, not as a result of the course, but as a vehicle of the course. Okay. Teachers have to see themselves as designers of students' experience and engagement, not as information provider, but as experience designer, as engagement designer. And they have to design many cycles of the work for the students. Okay. The learning outcomes have to be very carefully crafted right in the very beginning and in detail. Saying understand in learning outcomes is not going to work. And students have to be seen as active participants, not as recipient of knowledge. These are certain assumptions that we have to make, and these assumptions are very different from the assumptions that we make while conducting a class in a conventional manner. These are some elements of the project-based learning. There is success of a project-based learning model depends hugely on the problem design. How do we design the problem so that it is real life, at least real life like, if not real life. Okay. It is sufficiently complex, but not so complex that students can't even do it. It should be feasible. So a lot of creativity goes in the design of the projects. Problems. Then projects has to be divided in various tasks. So those tasks has to be planned in such a manner that the learning objectives are achieved. Conceptual knowledge is also gained through those tasks. Because doing project is not the objective in itself. Project is done in order to learn. Project is not done in order to complete the project. So a project-based learning model may fail even with a good project because the learning has not taken place. Conceptual learning has to take place. The student has to be forced to go to the authentic sources of the literature. There is a risk of going for PBL. Students may stop reading. That has to be taken care of. They must not stop reading. They must read the high quality books in order to do the projects. So tasks have to be designed in such a manner that reading is essential. They must develop this love for reading good literature in the subject that they are studying. The project has to be planned in such a manner that it is a group activity. They have to be given sufficient resources, learning resources. A lot of resources are available on net, books also. And some internal resources that will gradually develop in every institute that implements this model. Projects have to be seen as incrementally evolving. One should not wait for the project at the end of the semester. On a weekly basis, please see some progress. Incrementally evolving. So project should be seen as evolving every week, not just coming suddenly at the end of the semester. Diagrammatic uses, various diagrams for general problem solving exist, they should be used. Briefings and debriefings of every session have to be planned with great care. Students have to be engaged in cycles of work. They have to do the work repeatedly so that they can improve. And they reflect and then improve. The work has to be rigorous. They should maintain a logbook, and teachers should provide them guidance and scaffolding. And the assessment should be based on project, but in such a manner that the individual's work can be assessed. If these can't be done, then it is very risky to do project-based learning, typically in Indian situation. And that's my last slide. The PBL engagements have to be active, collaborative, integrative, and reflective. They should be challenged to collaborate. They should be challenged to integrate various concepts and the work of various team members. And they should be having the opportunity to reflect on their older work and improve upon it. And also reflect on others' work and critique it. With this, I thank you all. This is the address of my blog that I write sometimes about technical education. And that's my LinkedIn. Those of you who want to connect, I'll be happy to. Thank you very much. I will welcome questions.
Thank you, Professor. Now the floor is open for interaction. It can happen in two ways. You can either type it in the chat box, wherein I shall read it for a professor to respond, or else kindly use the hand raise option. We shall call out your name and the faculty concerned could unmute and interact with professor. We already have a question from Professor Kanagaraj. Any book titles for computer science course in specific? He's requesting for some book titles, Professor.
For project-based learning.
Yeah.
You see, there are a lot of research papers that you can find. Okay, a lot of research papers are available. If you go to transactions of ACM transactions on computing education, you will find a lot of literature. And one resource that I will recommend to everybody is there is a Stanford University's e-magazine called Tomorrow's Professor, Tom Prof. Okay, and every week 2 articles this Professor Rick Rees has been posting about higher education. Okay, so I would encourage you to go through that. Then there are a lot of journals that publish engineering education related material and computing education material. Okay, ACM and IEEE run this conference on software engineering education, and you will find many case studies done by various people across the world implementing a variety of teaching methods in their courses. Okay, so I would encourage all of you to, as teachers of engineering or sciences or arts, you read some research related to a discipline. I am sure of that. I also encourage you to start reading some research about teaching of your subjects. There is enough literature available, lot of literature is available. There are more than 30-40 journals about technical education, about science education, about higher education by reputed publishers like Springer, by Elsevier, by IEEE, by ACM, by Sage, all great publishers have published a lot of papers. Okay, there are books on this area. There is a book by Goldberg called Entrepreneur Engineer. You know, there are a lot of such material is available. Start reading literature related to teaching of higher education subjects, and you will love this. You know.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Professor, I have a question. So coming from humanities domain, We see a great scope for project-based learning. And do you have any insights on facilitating language learning through project-based learning framework?
A lot of literature you will find on language teaching in journals on higher education. You know, language teachers have done good amount of work on at least in school. But you are talking on higher education at this point. So when you say language education, you're talking of English or foreign language like French, etc.
English in specific, Professor.
Okay. So
we do find a lot of inputs happening at the school level. We have seen a number of models, successful models across the globe at school. But then, do you have any specific insights for bringing in PBL for collegiate education?
So instead of bringing project-based learning, you bring in their inquiry learning.
Yes.
Okay, give them some task to investigate, in the sense that you have to read. The problem that can be given to them is you have to read this novel or this piece of literature and write a critique on this from this perspective.
Yes.
Start doing this. So start giving the problem, you know, in the beginning, I would say. Give them tasks that you have to read this literature. So if you give different pieces of literature to different people and ask them to critique it from a different perspective, they will have to do it. But only challenge for you would be to be able to read all those critiques, and that would become a challenge for you. And if your classes are large, I don't know how will you find time to do that. So
we are in fact doing that, Professor. We are progressing in that direction presently.
Yeah. So project-based learning and these inductive methods of teaching, I would say, and there is a variety, cannot be very productive if our teacher-student ratio is not good. If our teacher-student ratio in our college or our university is something like 20 plus, then it will really create a sorry figure.
True.
Because 20 plus as a teacher-student ratio is designed by AICTE, UGC and the education administrators, keeping the deductive methods. So that 20 plus ratio or something like 20:1 ratio works reasonably okay if the method is deductive. But if the method is inductive, then it is a lot of one-to-one attention that has to be paid. Then it is not a mass production. Then every student has to be given personal attention. So the first thing that has to be done is the teacher-student ratio should not be, by and large, in the university or the college more than 15:1. If project-based learning or inductive methods of learning, not just project-based, inductive methods of teaching have to be implemented, teacher-student ratio must be must be improved. Curriculum has to be redesigned. For example, we do not have a pure mathematics course in our curriculum. We do not teach any mathematics course just as mathematics in the core. There are electives that come. But what we do, we teach, and I can see one of my colleagues sitting here in this session also. Sandeep Singh is a professor of mathematics. Okay. What we do, we club mathematics with engineering and computer and programming. So you do linear algebra and statistics in order to do data analytics with Python. So you don't do mathematics just for the sake of mathematics, but there is a larger purpose of it. You do differential equations because you want to do civil engineering and electrical engineering problem solving, because differential equations are used to model the civil engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering structures and systems. So you do the mathematics in the context of the engineering, and you also apply computer programming to solve the problems. So we have redesigned our curriculum completely. Our first 2 years are very different from the first 2 years of any other university or college in the country. Our courses are integrated multidisciplinary courses in the first 2 years, where mathematics teacher, electrical engineering teacher, mechanical teacher and computer science teacher together are team teaching many courses.
Thank you, Professor. We have another question from Professor Amsaveni. She wants you to brief about the assessment rubrics for project-based learning.
Yeah. So we used a variety. So it is multi-stage. We don't just depend on the last at the end. We start, as I said, it should be, there should be stages of assessment. So there is a synopsis, then there is storytelling, there is a diagrammatic representation, and so this 35 marks that we have given for project 2 in the semester 2 of this course, it was actually divided into 7-8 components. And that has Viva also, individual Viva also, group presentation also. So there is a variety. It is not that one presentation and Viva, group Viva, and we give marks out of 35. Okay, so there it is divided into multiple components. Okay, and then students are assessed according to that.
Thank you, Professor. Any more questions?
Yeah, I'm Professor Anil Kumar from Instrumentation.
Yes,
I
Professor.
just have one question. How many hours do you dedicate for this project-based learning every week?
In a course or what?
In the course.
In one course?
Yes.
So our first semester, for example, is 22 credits. And in that, 3 courses are project-based learning based, and other courses are not project-based learning based. And those three courses are, so we have given a broad definition of the credit here. We have said that 1 credit of work in a semester should broadly mean 35 hours of work inside and outside the class by each student throughout the semester. So if it is a 3 credit course, 35 into 3, that many hours the student should spend inside the class and outside the class. If it is a 6 credit course, 35 into 6, and there is one course which is 10 credit also, because it is the integration of 3 courses. Linear algebra, statistics, and Python programming is all integrated in one course. I mean, one can see them as 3 courses, but because we give them in integrated manner, because there are projects that bind the 3 topics in a very seamless manner, we have made it a 10 credit course. And for that, students have to give 35 into 10 hours, 350 hours of work in the complete semester. Okay, so that would around 15 weeks of a semester or 16 weeks of a semester. You can divide per week how much should they spend. For this course, there is a contact hour of 2 hours every day because it's a 10 credit course. For the courses that are 3 credit, it is maybe 3 or 4 hours of contact every week. But then there is project that they have to do. So it is more demanding. It is certainly more. But if you plan the projects well, the students can really create great joy for us. At the end of the semester, the greatest joy that comes is looking at the projects of the students.
Thank you, Professor. If there aren't any more questions, may I request everyone to please enable your cameras for a few seconds. Let's quickly capture this moment. Those of you who could be in a position to enable, kindly enable your cameras. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. May I now invite Dr. Ratna to present the concluding remarks and formally thank Professor Goyal for such an enlightening session. Over to you, ma'am.
Yes, Dabi. Thank you, sir, for showing light on emerging global perspectives on project-based learning. You elaborated the inductive teaching methods, including problem-based and project-based learning strategies, the various global models, including your university, and the PBL elements provided by you is really inspirational one, sir. We can understand the framework of future-proof education for the new generation. It is highly relevant in the present context because we have introduced a project-based learning framework in our curriculum during the previous academic year and successfully reaping the benefit. We look forward for more insights and guidance from your expertise in future, sir. to enhance our model. Thank you, sir, for the enlightening session. On behalf of PBL team of KCT, I extend my sincere thanks to our principal, Dr. Mary Levisi, Academic Dean and Head SFS. It's my privilege to thank all the heads of the various departments and my faculty colleagues for gracing this occasion. Thank you, sir, and thank you all.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, and it was truly amazing. And I'll come back to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.
God bless.
Thank you, Professor.